You're listening to the Co-Creator Network. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Hi, everyone. This is Christina Pratt, and I'd like to invite you to a new series called The Magic of You, the Art of Living an Authentic, Powerful, and Purpose-Driven Life. This series is free, and it begins February 26th, 2019. And you can register anytime at magicofyouseries.com/C. Pratt. So this series is hosted by the lovely Lotus Sky, and the experts are from across the board: coaches, business people, shamanic practitioners, healers, artists. It's a whole interesting group of people sharing different perspectives on living authentically. And my particular interview is about the hazards of living an authentic life. So I invite you all to join us. Again, it's at magicofyouseries.com/C, as in Christina, Pratt. And it begins on February 26th. You receive one email a day with one talk with one new expert and their bonus offering. So I hope to see you at the Magic of You. And now, here's this week's show.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Why Shamanism Now, a practical path to authenticity, with your host, Christina Pratt, Director of the Last Mask Center for Shamanic Healing. She's talking about how shamanic skills can bring us to physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, especially when nothing else can. Now, here's your host, Christina Pratt.
Welcome, everyone, to Why Shamanism Now. This is your host, Christina Pratt. And I would like to call in the ancestors to join us here today. The ancestors on all the continents, all the way back to the first people, to all the grandfathers and all the grandmothers, calling out to all of those who bring that which is good and true and beautiful into our lives, those that bring us our inheritance of wisdom and experience and love and the dreaming of our ancestors that help to shape us in our lives here today. May we call on them. May we be in good relationship with them. May we be with them in a way that helps to support us in the healing and the change and the innovation necessary to manifest the gifts needed by those who are coming. We call out to the earth below to be with us here today and help us to ground deeply into the energy of home, the energy of connection and interconnection, the energy in our lives of belonging, that deep, deep belonging to the earth, to each other, and to all living things. And from the earth, I'd like to reach up to the energy of the sky, reach all the way up to that highest power of the universe, and by whatever name we call that power, let us call that energy down into our minds and our hearts, into our bodies, and into our circle here today. We call out to the energy of the sky to bring in protection and generosity and blessing and the benevolence of our universe. We call in those mentors and champions who help us along our way and those who have blazed the trail before us. We call out to the energy of the sky above to join with the energy of the earth and to bring us here into our hearts. May we call out to the energy of the heart to be with us here today, that energy that interconnects all things and connects to the invisible and the visible world. We call out to the energy of the heart where we can blend the passions of our belly with the wisdom of our mind to bring these energies together in the heart where we might craft and shape the reason that we are here. And may all that transpires here today help each one of us in living our soul's true purpose. May we all hear what needs to be heard, and may we say what needs to be said, and may the ancestors gathered round and help us to make sure that all that transpires here today is good for all living things. So this week, we continue with our initiation series, and I would like to welcome today our guest, Gretchen McKay. Welcome, Gretchen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining us today. Gretchen is part of our ongoing initiation series. We're talking about my hypothesis of the lack of initiation being at the core of our cultural sickness. And it is our hope that in hearing the stories of a diverse range of contemporary initiation experiences that have functioned to truly transform these regular, everyday, ordinary individual people into shamans, that we will come to remember what initiation truly means. That's our little working hypothesis for this series. And actually, before I go too much further, Gretchen, I need to give thanks to all those people in my community and those listeners who are donating to the show to keep the show on the air. Every single dollar goes straight to keeping the show live and available for free to everyone through iTunes, through the Co-Creator Network downloads, and through you can download off whyshamanismnow.com website as well. And that is also where you find the support button to click and offer large or small your dollars to help to keep Why Shamanism Now on the air. So we give gratitude for the spirit help and the human help, and for Gretchen being with us here today. So
Fabulous.
Now, Gretchen, you are here as we've had Desiree DeMars on the show, who is a woman who is extremely eclectic. Her initiations have come outside of any training or organized tradition, and she is one of the most eclectic and effective practitioners that I've ever met. And then we had Michael Dunning, who is a really interesting, spontaneous, powerful, utterly unique initiation experience with a yew tree in Scotland, and then cultivated his own shamanic practices and training and healing work out of that, certainly within the lines of tradition of shamanism, but also now a unique offering in a sense. And so now we have you, who have had an initiatory experience in a living shamanic tradition. And then our final guest will be someone who is in a lineage that has similar sort of rigorous stages of initiation, but is a dead tradition that they're re-enlivening. Yeah. And so I brought you also, Gretchen, just because for those of you actually should just go on the website now and understand why this is just also funny, is to go, and Gretchen's site is ancestralwisdom.com. And you could not find a cuter, whiter little woman in the world to go off to Africa to be trained as a Sangoma. And that's just sort of the joy and the fun of this. So everybody go to ancestralwisdom.com so you can see the pictures. And if you would like to reach Gretchen, it is GC for Gretchen Crilly. So GC McKay 2 at mac.com. And so these are ways you can connect with Gretchen and her story and her work and her practice. When Gretchen's admitted love affair with Africa began decades ago, and on a trip to Africa, she had a consultation or a divination with a Sangoma who would become her mentor. And he revealed to her that her life had been hard and difficult because she wasn't doing what she was chosen to do by her ancestors. And I'm not sure how much you knew about shamanism at the time, but if you like another American, you go, what the hell do they have to say? This is my life. I get to decide what I want to do.
Tried to deny them at that point.
Right. And so through the traditional initiatory path of a Sangoma, Gretchen has ultimately become the woman she is meant to be and is practicing now in Southern California. And her website is full of stories and descriptions and photos, as well as the usual and very extensive, frankly, calendar of classes, apprenticeship and mentoring, and a 2-year advanced training. So there's a bunch of stuff for you all to go look at after you get done listening to Gretchen today. So
where do we begin?
Where do we even begin? So how did you feel about Africa before you first traveled there?
I've thought about this so long. I was definitely not in attunement with my family or anyone else I knew. When I was a kid, I used to draw patterns, and I always thought they were Native American. But as I got older, I realized I was drawn to African baskets and African people and African things. So I began reading, I began exploring, and in '94, I went to Africa by myself for 6 weeks and fell in love with the land. And so I just kept trying to get back, and as I was studying shamanism, I kept looking for the African tradition, and there was very little written. There was only one person who wrote about the path of the Sangoma or the South African traditions at all, and that was Mutwa. So I read all of his materials and then slowly but surely began to meet Africans who could introduce me to another African, and finally found someone who could talk to me about Sangomas. And I pretty much talked his ear off for 9 hours, and then it was a romantic thing, I think, at the time. I just loved Africa. And that felt like where I had to go find this traditional piece. My friends were going to South America or, Nepal or other places, and I just had to get to Africa. So it's a yearning, it's a soul yearning. And you're right. Even the Africans will always say to me, really? You? Very short, white, European-looking woman.
Mm-hmm. But did you know something different was up when you finally walked on the land, when you finally got there?
I knew when I landed, the very first time I landed in Nairobi in 1994, the plane touched the ground and I started to cry. And it was just that, it felt like home. My family used to worry that I would move there permanently, but I've just kept going back. I've been to Africa 6 times, and each time anywhere from 6 weeks to 3-4 months, and I haven't seen most of the United States. So yeah, there's a calling there to that land.
So talk to us. How did you find someone who would mentor? So who was your first mentor, and how did that relationship come together?
It really, I will say the ancestors brought him to me, mm-hmm. because for a number of years I had been in a drumming circle with a local group. And, after I did the basic training with Michael Harner in the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, and I would ask these questions at these circles about who I was to study with. I kept feeling like there was someone. And they always saw this African man, and I saw him too in my journeys, this African man dressed in white with a round thing on his head. And often to me, he would hold up a key. Never spoke. I was never told any names. But he repeatedly was in these journeys I had. And then in, I think it was 1999, I actually met PH, who would become my mentor, here in Southern California. He'd been brought here as an African elder to share his wisdom, because the Africans were being told by their ancestors that they needed to connect with Western people, because their tradition was going to die out if they didn't. So he had been brought here by a woman who had written a couple of books about him and some other Sangomas. And after the third person called me, friends in the shamanic community called me and said, Gretchen, you have to go have a reading with this man. His name is P.H. Manshali. And so the third person called. I said, I guess that's my sign, and I went. And I sat down in front of him, and he threw the bones for me. And I just cried. I said, I know this system. Mm-hmm. And he began to tell me that the profession I was in at the time, which was teaching elementary school, I was finished with. That wasn't my path. And I'd been thinking that for a number of years. I said, well, I know, but what is my path? And he said, you're a traditional doctor, which is what they call the healing path instead of shamanic practitioners or shamans. It's traditional healers or traditional doctors. And then he proceeded to tell me that the things I needed to do were to study the plants, or muti, as it's called in Africa, because they were calling me. And then he said, this was my path. And that was about it. I went home. I signed up for an herb program the next day, and spent the next year studying herbs just to sort of have a shortcut and an understanding of plants. And then also did shamanic work with plants, local plants. And then I got on a plane, and I'd asked him permission. I went to visit him in 2000, and I stayed with him for some time in his homestead in Swaziland. And during that time, he put me through a lot of tests and through the bones, and took me to other healers to verify whether I was what he would call called to the path of the Sangoma. And I was. And then he gave me a choice, which now I think back and think, I wonder what would have happened if I'd said no. He said, this is the path you're called to. Your ancestors are calling you. You may choose it, or you don't have to. And I said, I choose it, but I'll have to go home and come back next summer, which is what I did.
And there it began. And so just for our listeners, can you share just in general because there is a very traditional path of initiation.
Yes.
In this tradition. So can you kind of share it in its overall, and then we'll get into the good stories.
Okay. In general, and I can only say it from my perspective, because obviously if I had been an African in Africa, the situation might have been different. Because people resisted, but I didn't. I was just tired of the trials I'd had. It's a path of reconnecting and creating an alliance, a relationship with one's ancestral spirits. Very similar in some regards to what we view within core shamanism about our, say, upper world teachers, or some of the ascended masters or ascended ancestors even that we work with. But initially it is to make things right within one's lineage, to bring harmony and balance with one's lineage, to seek forgiveness, and then to restore a right walking, a right relationship with the guardians or the gatekeepers that are your ancestors. So there is a traditional ritual that you do morning and evening. And it is in the morning you face the east, wearing a white cloth, and you stir up, you make a foam out of this muti or herb that is a root or a bark that they call the bubbles. And you literally eat the bubbles with your tongue, and it begins to open up the gateways to communication with the ancestors. So you say your prayers and your connections every morning, and in the evening you say them to the west, sunrise and sunset. There was a considerable amount of steaming and purification and bathing with herbs, and sitting in silent meditation for hours. There were rituals that you performed, say that Baba would perform, or PH, I called him Baba, that means father, would perform to cut cords to make appeasements to the ancestors. In Africa, because it is such an ancient land, animal sacrifices are used. And so chickens are used frequently in different rituals. And for bigger sacrifices, goats, and ultimate sacrifices are cows. The community then does eat these animals. I mean, their diet does not consist of meat every day. So to have an animal sacrificed in a sacred way is a gift to the community, to the whole homestead, and to others outside of the home. We made trips to other healers. We made trips to sacred places in nature. And the added aspect of these initiations for me was that part of the time, if I was speaking with PH, I would understand because he was speaking in English. But a lot of the rituals and ceremonies that were performed for me were in Siswati or in Zulu, so I didn't know what was going on. And yet, the powerful feelings of being on this ancient land and participating in these ancient rituals, I must say, was profound. I still find that, it's 9 years later, I'm still beginning to understand the power and the depth of some of those initiations.
So in your experience of that, did you feel, it sounds to me, but I just don't want to assume here, it sounds to me like that you could feel a difference between what I would call part of the process, which is the cleansing and the dailiness and the preparing yourself for part of it,
right.
And then the events that were actually transformative, and yes. I think they go hand in hand.
They do, absolutely. But there was a difference, and I know for me in that land, it was literally standing on the African dirt. It was living in a homestead community where, for every ancestor that PH worked with and every ancestor that his wife worked with, there was a sacred hut, they call them ndombes, that was for each ancestor. So on this property, it was as if a community of many people were living, which in fact they were, but they weren't all living people, physical people. The humans lived in a couple of different buildings on the property. All the other buildings on the property were the houses of different ancestors. So that, you could feel the presence of their ancestors and my ancestors who had taken me to this land. That was probably, and to be part of these ancient rituals and initiations which have been part of this tradition of the Sangoma for, thousands of years.
So is there a point, is there an event that seems, or maybe a sequence of events, but that seems the truly transformative moment where you weren't who you were before and now you're the woman that you are today,
Yes, yeah. There. Of course, then it was just the beginning, right, of a whole other initiation and journey. But yes, there were two extremely powerful events there that changed me forever and continue to teach me. The first one was one where I was taken to high up into the mountains in Swaziland. I was taken to an ancient waterfall. And the whole thing was in Siswati. And so exactly what the prophet who was leading the ritual was saying, I don't know, but the spirits were so profound in this place. And everything from lighting candles around the area in a traditional way, offering the chicken, in a traditional way, and then being dipped into this ice-cold pool 7 times. I remember when I came out, I felt like I was in heaven. It was the most amazing. Since then, doing other work, I realized when we transfigure, or when we fully open up to divine source, and we feel that love and light literally pouring through us, that initiation was from source. I mean, that was the most amazing and love-filled experience I think I've ever had to this day. The second one was my graduation. And that was joyful, a bit unnerving, because no one would tell me what the different pieces of that would be. I knew I would be tested and have to find things. I knew that it was my ancestors' job to lead me and to tell me what, where to find different hidden objects during the day. But I really didn't know what that meant. And so they secluded me. Drums went on from Thursday night. It began Thursday night. The other sangomas started coming in, and there were various readings done with me, and a gift of a cow that was given to me, which was a huge sacrifice, and that fed the community. And then I was brought before different sangomas, and then put in seclusion overnight. And that night was not a restful night. My ancestors kept coming, and the drums kept going. Just this, it was really it was so profound to be in the middle of what I understood was ancient. One of my favorite experiences during the night before my graduation day, though, was my ancestors all came to me in a dream during the night. And first it was all of these grandmothers. And I have Irish and Scottish and Nordic, ancestors. And all these white grandmothers had party hats on and those little party favors, and they were all whistling and blowing these. They were so happy. So I knew that was good. And then the grandfathers all came in a dream, and they all had on kilts. And they were in a conga line enjoying the music. So I knew at that point I was okay. No matter how strange it got, everybody was happy.
Right. Beautiful.
It was.
And so how, can you put words to how you feel that it changed you? I know that's a really hard question.
It's a really hard one. I think that the feelings I have right now when you ask me that question, and the words that come to me, are blessing, immense trust in the love of my ancestors and my helping spirits, the magic that is not always there, in ordinary reality, but it's an illusion to think that we aren't loved and supported by the divine. It's a heart experience. It's a heart experience, and I knew during that time, during the whole, especially the last 3 months that I was there going through these things, there were challenges. I was 10,000 miles away from home. There was no internet access for me. He later got internet, but there was no internet access. I couldn't call out. Only connection I had to anyone at home was through letters that people would send. I was going through the most life-changing experience in my life, and I was by myself. And a lot of the time didn't understand what the people around me were saying. So it was a profound aloneness. And at the same time, the deepest connection I've ever had to spirit and nature, because they were ever present. And then the love and support of PH and his ancestors, just learned how we aren't alone on this journey.
So I'm wondering, now that you've had time to reflect back, if you go back in front of all of this experience, do you feel that you were somehow provoking this, or like were you doing things in your life that somehow brought this on?
I know that I had to have manifested this. It's funny, isn't it? I have thought of this. I think it was a dual thing. I think there is a soul connection that many of us have to places on the planet that are not the places we live. And so we go there and visit. Africa has always been that place for me. So once I began to learn about shamanism, and I had no intention, as most of us didn't, of this becoming my work, but I was learning about all these other indigenous paths, and then I couldn't find anything about Africa. So it led me to pray for, to envision a path. And then things would happen, like Miriam McKay had a CD out, and it was called Sangoma. I had learned the word. It was called Sangoma. And so I listened to all these songs. Well, they happened to be her grandmother's songs, who was a Sangoma. So I would listen to them for hours. And then I had African friends here in Southern California, and one of my friends had someone visit from Zimbabwe. So he knew about the Sangomas of South Africa. And so I kept asking questions. I think when I finally met PH, that was part of the joy of the journey. I didn't even have any questions after that. Here's this little man sitting in front of me that looked like the man that had been in my journeys. Oh. So was I calling them? Yes, but they were calling me too. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah. And do you feel that you were somehow oriented in your life in a way different than other people around you that were, doing their everyday job, but not necessarily? Well, you hear a lot of people sitting around talking about their lives, and they're not really satisfied with their lives.
Mm-hmm,
it's a pretty typical American conversation.
Right.
And do you feel that you oriented yourself somehow? Like I was talking with Desiree, and her thing is really simple. She just always asks why. Like she's never satisfied.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
That little
She
3-year-old,
does.
but why? And and in some way that question just keeps leading her beyond where other people stop the conversation.
That's such a good perspective.
They just go back to work.
I have an incredible curiosity, and I am tenacious. When I'm interested in anything, why would be, I guess that is what I ask. I just don't stop. Mm-hmm. I just am very persistent with the spirits, with research, with everything. I love that aspect. I'm very curious. As far as what led me to that, I was always tenacious and a little annoying, I think, to my family. And my mother, I remember, told me one time, she said, "I love you. I've never understood you, but I love you." I did not fit anything else in my family. I grew up in an all-white neighborhood. I think there was one he was a dark-skinned person in our high school, but he was Basque. He wasn't even, I mean, I lived in about as white a community as anyone could imagine. And yet someplace in my 20s I began, but I always listened to Motown. Maybe that should have been my clue, right?
Right. Well, it is interesting, though, because in my workshops, these people make masks of their helping spirit. And they're supposed to ask their helping spirit how it wants to be honored in a mask versus making a mask. If your helping spirit is a crow, making a mask that looks like a crow.
Right.
They're supposed to ask first how the crow wants to be represented. And sometimes it is representational. Sometimes it does want to look like a crow. But a lot of times it doesn't. And there was this woman, I always called her the whitest woman I ever met. She was from Minnesota, and she just couldn't have been more of a middle American white girl, I swear. Yeah. And she asked, I don't actually remember what her helping spirit was, but it was an animal from the African continent. And I went away and I came back, and she had made this mask with the lines and the shaggy hemp stuff. And I swear I have seen that mask in a natural history museum.
Wow.
It was an absolute replica of an authentic African mask of that animal.
How amazing.
And she had no idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that people, especially Americans that don't ever travel, I mean, they haven't even seen America, much less gone to another continent, is recognizing that these spirit energies are alive. And I do know people that have said, I traveled to Africa and I knew I'd gone home. For me, it happened to be Ecuador. I mean, it's often just not you're anywhere near where you're even a citizen.
Right.
And I think until you've had that experience, I think it's sometimes hard to recognize that we do have these homes of our soul.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that these spirits live.
Us. Yeah.
And that there's an aspect of this that never dies too. So the idea that these African people could be told by their ancestors, if you do not start to share your teachings outside of your particular, lineage, your teachings will die. And that's partly what I've seen in my humble practice, is that people who have no idea historically or culturally certain things access exactly the same energies. They're working with eagle spirit, and the next thing we know, we see this odd mask that looks exactly like an eagle spirit mask from, the Sahelish up here or something. These energies live, they're patterns, and that they call us. Absolutely. And I did a show that's coming up about death, and one of the things that I learned first in working with dead people a lot and the helping spirits that were helping was that from the spirit perspective, there's one humanity, period. There's just humanity. And they don't get our distinctions. No. And that's what I see, talking with you about, the love of Africa and connecting with these transitions, and how your ancestors in their kilts and their party hats are actually partying with these African ancestors. We all go back to the same people. It's all humanity there, and we're all tapping. And I guess what we would hope to do would be to tap the real energies, whatever they might be.
Exactly. I think and I'm finding now in my own practice here, I certainly am not repeating all of those initiations or rituals here with most of my students because they're not appropriate. But it's like you're saying, to tap into what Spirit has to say for this person. I mean, we all have loving ancestors and guides, and then we have this oversoul of power animals and ancestors and guides helping us. And it's just a magical world with so many threads. It truly is us tapping into the web of life in all of its aspects, all of its worlds.
Well, and actually, Gretchen, this is a good segue because I didn't ask you this question earlier, but share with us kind of a normal day. I love that, normal day in the life of a shamanic practitioner. And anyway, a quote unquote normal day in
Yes,
the
a normal
life
day.
of Gretchen McKay in your teaching and your
Mhm.
practice. And in particular, what I think is interesting is how are you working with having both this traditional training and this traditional experience and then working with contemporary people on a different continent, different helping spirit, different spirits of the land here. They
Mhm.
traditionally have asked for different things, and then you have your core. How do you? What's it like just on a given week in the life of Gretchen McKay?
A given week in the life of Gretchen McKay. I like that. I do many readings during the week, and the divination system that I use comes from Africa, and it's called Throwing the Bones. Yes, there are some bones in it. No, there are no human bones. I get asked those two things. And the bones that are in it are from animals that were used in sacrifice and in initiations in Africa, and they represent the ancestors. So, from that perspective, my divinations with clients will be, it's always, people that come to me always have ancestral issues that they are wanting to resolve or didn't realize, like myself, needed to be resolved, but are willing to resolve them. So that's kind of the interesting piece that I've seen the spirits connect me to my own work in Africa and why I went there, this healing of ancestral lineages. So I do that, but I do lots of ceremony and rituals with people out in nature. So a client may come, we do a reading. Oftentimes they have asked previously before their reading to have a soul retrieval. So typical shamanic work might go on, extraction and soul retrieval. I'm doing a lot of what I call family soul retrieval, which is similar to the soul retrieval process, but the spirits have talked about the need to heal lineages way back where no one has memory. So we do that. Then we might go down to the beach because I live very close to the ocean, and I have a couple of sacred places I work with. Another client might meet me down there and we do a ritual at the ocean. It might be a burial, it might be healing, forgiveness work. Another client might come in the afternoon and we go down into the canyon where there are some gorgeous oak trees and some healing places and caves. Let's see, some phone consultations during the week. I often have healing circles where my students come and they bring people that we can work on. I call it their practice sessions. I teach classes on many weekends to people about anything from drumming to restoring personal power to my 2-year program. I usually have at least 1 or 2 students during the week that are studying with me on a monthly basis, and they might be learning, that's very individualized. That's where I use my training with PH in Africa here, because it's really about asking the spirits, what does this person need to move forward on their path? And I have a few that I'm teaching to use objects in divination. We don't call it throwing the bones because that requires going to Africa and being initiated into that system. But we call it throwing objects, and we use shells and other things. So that's my week. And then doing a radio interview with my friend Christine.
I'm looking at this question I was thinking about asking, and I'm realizing, when we really do a good job of getting out of the way and letting spirit guide us in our work, this question is totally irrelevant. But I was just wondering, was there ever a time when blending the traditional and the contemporary was just a disaster?
I think I'm a Capricorn, so I work out my details before I get to the table usually, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things about blending the two traditions, Western and African, came from a trip in 2006, and there were some friends from the shamanic community that went with me. And we were in Kenya, but then we went down to Swaziland and spent some time with PH. And we had long discussions with him about to do animal sacrifice versus not doing it, because it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me here, first of all, in town. And it just does. I don't want to do that. And I'd been asking the spirits about that. PH's perspective is absolutely, there is nothing like it. You can't, the ancestors expect an animal sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So when we came back, we spent about 6 months journeying together, asking the spirits, what about animal sacrifice? And interestingly, the first thing that the spirit said was, well, there really isn't anything like it because it's so ancient. It goes back to people initially offering the blood of precious animals in a sacred manner. And this is it's so old, it's thousands of years old. So, yes, that is a very powerful way of connecting. However, they did end up giving us alternatives, and, depending on the spirits of nature and the places that I'm working in, making that spiritual connection, asking the spirits in nature what they want for offerings, and asking permission to do the work there. And then connecting with the spirits of place. Oftentimes the ocean will instruct people to bring flowers. We always offer rice and coins. And actually some of that comes from my work with another African shaman named Mandaza Kandemwe, who is from Zimbabwe. And when he comes here, he works with the water spirits a lot. So he's taught us, and he's actually has been a vegetarian and never done animal sacrifices. So it's been a real gift to be able to talk with him about how to work in nature and make powerful offerings to nature, but without, the African, part of the African way.
Well, and it is an interesting issue, and in some of my training we discussed it similarly because we were working with an African teacher, and one of the things was, when you're in Africa working with traditional people in their traditional ways. I remember one guy had a serious knee injury when he was there, and he had been sent literally all over Africa to different healers to get healed. And he was frankly getting tired and fed up because, he had to find a chameleon, and then he had to find it was like the remedy really extreme. And he was tired of, getting driven all over to get all these different obscure things, and he finally, and then they were, he was being in another divination, with this particular remedy. And he just said, isn't there any other way? And the response from the diviner was, but this is our medicine. In other words, the diviner was saying, this is the limitation of our medicine. This is just what we do. And and it really struck me that he was saying, and he wasn't saying there's anything wrong with our medicine, but he was also saying this is just what we do for that. And he wasn't saying there aren't other things, but you can't get it from me.
Exactly.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so then we bring that back to North America, and you look at shamanic history in North America, there isn't a lot of animal sacrifice. There's very, very little on this continent. So I say, okay, well then this continent, this land, which is frankly still birthing itself, as you and I know, living on the, Ring of Fire side of things. This land is alive. It's moving all the time with earthquakes and volcanoes. Yeah. Africa isn't.
Right.
And so there's something about the land and what it needs and what it doesn't need. And some friends of ours that were in the same training in Africa had a farm up in Port Townsend in in the Pacific Northwest, and they were practicing as they'd been taught, and they'd opened up the shrines and they'd done the animal sacrifices, and at one point they couldn't figure out why this particular ritual wasn't going forward. And so we finally stopped and really started divining, okay, what is really going on? And the response was, would you stop killing things on our land? I was like, stop giving us blood. They didn't want blood. The
Isn't that interesting?
That land wanted other things. And that's when we really got, and our teacher had said this all along, but we're hesitant to realize we need to start at the beginning and say, okay, this is where we're going to be working. All right, so spirits of the land, can we work here? Okay, great.
Yes.
And now that we're working with you, what would you like?
What would you like? Yeah.
And to understand that in many ways the traditional cultures give us the questions to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily the answers. Maybe the answers. But it's not a given. Just because it works for them where they are doesn't necessarily mean it's for us.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have to have some kind of connection ourselves to the offerings that we're giving. You know, and the blood, if I'm going to be in the forefront of a ritual and I have to kill something and drop the blood, and I'm cringing the whole time and saying, I'm sorry to the animal, probably the energy from that sacrifice is not going to be powerful. Mm-hmm. It's so many things. I think what you've said is so important. We have to revisit these things. Here in America in particular, we are remembering our own shamanic roots, but we're disconnected from the land of our ancestors. So even if we are working with our own ancestors here, what would have worked for them in their land is not necessarily appropriate here. Exactly. So, just asking those questions, like Desiree said, why? Why? Yeah. Why is it important? And what should we do? And how should we do it?
Yeah. And then the other thing, I think you brought up an important part of this, is there's another piece that's, I think, well, it seems to me practical, which is, if we're just going to Farmer Bob's and buying 16 chickens for 16 different people's sacrifices for their offerings to 16 different ancestors, they're Farmer Bob's chickens and he just got paid for them. Where's the sacrifice if I'm one of those people killing one of those chickens? As you said, originally, these were precious animals to these people, whether they were raising them or whether they hunted them. It took energy. And I'm looking at these 15 contemporary people and saying the bigger sacrifice would be your time and energy to do your own work, because that's what
absolutely.
And about that chicken, it's the minutes your blood is pumping through your veins that you would actually focus on preparing for this ritual. And what of yourself, for example, are you willing to sacrifice so that this new thing you're wanting to have happen can happen? And, for my money, that's frankly where I see a lot of contemporary people are, is that's where the real sacrifice is giving of yourself.
It has to cost us something.
Yeah.
The story you mentioned about your friend in Africa, it is true. First of all, when I've stayed with PH so that it wouldn't take me 2 years, to get around to all these places, I would rent a car. But still, we would be in that car all day long, going from one place to another, getting a divination, getting the chicken. If you went to get the chicken from either from town or from one of the farmers, they knew why you were there. You were wearing all of this clothing that said to everyone, I am a Twasa, I am a training, So, and you're with your mentor. So there's this traditional understanding, and you are making a statement that you are honoring this particular tradition. So there is something in it for that. And like you said, collecting things and having to go out in the bush and do this and do that. It's different. Here, time is what we value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, so Gretchen.
Yes.
Have you ever thought about who you would be now in your life had your initiation never happened?
Occasionally I have, but it's with so much gratitude that my life didn't turn out anything like what I thought I wanted it to be. And I can't imagine living a different life. This is an amazing way of being in the world, and it continues to expand and grow all the time. I think this is what we call living one's passion, and grateful. Mm-hmm. Grateful that I didn't manifest what I thought I wanted.
Yeah, instead you did what your ancestors dreamt you to do.
Yeah.
And can you feel that now? Now that you're course corrected, and now you're in this path, and you're doing the work and teaching and healing, and can you feel yourself kind of like in that river of the ancestral?
I can, and I mean, as many people on the planet right now, this has been the last couple of years have been some big transitions again for me. And currently I'm in another transition, and it's leading me in places that I would have said I wouldn't be comfortable. Mm-hmm. But I know now, because of this river of working and trusting the ancestors, I know that if it's uncomfortable, it's probably taking me in a direction that I'm not familiar with yet. Therefore, I'm being led into something new. And always I trust that it's something wonderful, because that's what's been proven to me over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not something I even knew to dream of. It might be downsizing. But what happens with the downsizing becomes expansion. Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that.
And then do you feel that sense of, those who are coming, those we're dreaming into manifestation, sort of calling it out of you, keeping you in transition, keeping you keeping me honest, keeping me in gratitude and joy. I'm totally in awe sometimes of the people that come and find me, whether it's as a client or students, and their stories are such an inspiration and continue to inspire me along this path. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
It's good.
Well, so for those of you who would like to continue to explore this path with Gretchen, her website is ancestralwisdom.com, and you can reach her at gcmckay2@mac.com. And is there anything in particular coming up, Gretchen, that you would like people to know about?
No, I mean, I can feel, it's funny. I was feeling this sense of love and gratitude to you for allowing my ancestors to have a moment to help me review this. So thank you. And I always have classes coming up. There's things on my website that if anybody's interested in. And I'm also really good about emails and calls. I love to talk to people about their questions, and I love to hear about other people's work as well. So, yeah, I'd like to hear from anybody that would love to continue a conversation or share. Right. And thank you, Christine.
Oh, Gretchen, thank you, and thank your ancestors for being so persistent.
Yeah. I will.
Yeah. So we thank the ancestors for joining us here today, for the earth below and the sky above and the heart that unites us all. We thank all of those listeners and my own community students for their donations that keep the show on the air and the downloads free and available through iTunes and at the whyshamanismnow.com website. For those of you that are a little confused, technically speaking, we had to resubscribe to iTunes. So if you were subscribing and now it's not working on your iPod, you need to just resubscribe, and that'll be easy. But I want to just give thanks for all of you. Every single time you share this show with someone else who shares it with someone else, it keeps growing, and we keep finding a way to spread the word to people that shamanism is effective and interesting. And as Gretchen has so beautifully shared with us today, it brings us into that thing we are all so deeply longing for, which is the knowing of the profound love that our universe has for us and we can have for our universe, no matter how we conceive of the beings within it. So Gretchen, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Christine. Bye.
Goodbye. And next week, everybody, we're taking a little break from our initiation series to have a talk with Elsa and Howard Malpass and Nick Breeze Woods, all from the UK, who will be talking with us about the Society of Shamanic Practitioners Conference this September in the UK. Thank you all for joining us this week. Bye-bye.